All right, hello, welcome to AP World History Chapter 9. In this chapter, we're going to be talking about classical India, continuing along with our 600 to 600 CE time period. Really, essentially, there are two empires that you need to know about in India from this time period. The first one is the Mauryanas, which are a highly centralized empire, and the second, which is the Gupta dynasty, which is more decentralized. So think more along the lines of some of the civilizations we talked about before this that were decentralized. Basically, unification of India happened because when Alexander the Great moved in, conquered the Persians. He came into India as well and conquered the northwest corner of India. And then all of a sudden his men mutinied and they just left. And this left a power vacuum. In that power vacuum, a small regional kingdom named Magadha stepped up and took control. From Magadha, a man named Chandragupta Maurya would eventually conquer Magadha and much of India. And this would establish, of course, the Mauryan dynasty. They pretty much conquered everything in India except for the very tip of India, south of the Deccan Plateau. Pretty much everything else was under their control. So it was a very large empire for its time period. Now, Chandragupta had help governing his empire. He had a kind of a right-hand man named Kadahaya, who wrote a political guidebook called the Arthashastra, which is similar kind of to Machiavelli's Prince that we'll talk about in European Renaissance several chapters from now. Chandragupta himself made incredible use of spies, much like Darius, his eyes and ears. So he made use of those to make sure that people were doing what they needed to do. They were influenced by the bureaucracy of the Persians. Remember that the Persians had quite a bit of contact with the northwest corner of India. So they were modeling themselves bureaucratically after that great Persian bureaucracy that we learned about. Now, the high point of the Mauryan dynasty came under Chandragupta's grandson named Ashoka. Ashoka, pretty much the only place that was able to keep him at bay for a little while was a small kingdom called Kalinga. But eventually they would have this massive battle, and he would kill over 100,000 Kalingans in the battle, and then hundreds of thousands more died from being refugees and stuff. Basically, it was a nightmare, a huge disaster, and one that changed Ashoka forever. It would cause him to convert to Buddhism, and from that point on, he would try to be more of a peaceful ruler. He's very famous for issuing his ideas and proclamations through the rock edicts. Basically these giant stone pillars that he would communicate what he wanted with the rest of the empire. He was great at making fantastic roads. He had roads over 1,000 miles long, was able to move troops and facilitate trade, of course. But unfortunately, decline in the Mauryan dynasty would set in almost immediately after Ashoka's death. They tended to pay their soldiers too much, the bureaucrats too much. They're highly paid, they're well paid, but these are times of peace. They don't need to pay the soldiers that much. They don't need to have as many soldiers, and it really affected the kingdom. This would put India into a period of regional kingdoms that would compete with each other. In a short time frame here, you would have the Greek-speaking colony in the northwest corner called Bactria would kind of take over. Never a hugely powerful place, but it was great at facilitating trade with China and the Mediterranean. You had China in the east, you had the Mediterranean in the west, and so Bactria pretty much took that over. Now, they were beat by the Kushans, who would rule for about 300 years. These are kind of minor players between the Mauryans and the Gupta. But the second great empire in Indian history was the Gupta. They were also founded by a man named Chandragupta. But this Chandragupta was Chandra was his first name, and then Gupta was his second name. It wasn't one name like the first guy. We'll kind of see that in class. They were smaller than Mauryans. Remember that they were decentralized, but they were a very safe empire. It was a place where people, everything was orderly. It was a time of great science and math, mathematically speaking. They had the concept of zero. They calculated pi. They had geometry. Our mathematical numerals that we use today, called Arabic numerals, are actually from the Indians. It was the Arabics, adopted it from them. So a lot of stuff. They knew that the Earth, scientifically speaking, they knew that the Earth was a sphere. Really a high society here. Economically speaking, you're moving from straight agriculture to a time of manufactured goods. You're always going to have agriculture, but in this time period, more and more manufactured goods are being done. Things like pots and utensils and stuff like that. Trade-wise, they were exporting pearls and cotton, black pepper, and their manufactured goods out. They were very highly sought after, and because the presence of the early Persians in their dynasty really helped facilitate trade with the Mediterranean and all that, because of the huge Persian Empire that was in existence before them. Socially speaking, incredibly strong patriarchal society. Women most definitely subservient. In the Gupta area, the second of the dynasties, child marriages started appearing. 8 or 9 years old, you would be betrothed to a man in his 20s, and then once you hit puberty, it would be time for you to get married. Now, an interesting side effect in this time period, because as trade flourishes and people are getting wealthier and wealthier, it's trying to shaken up the social order of things, because in the early days with the Aryans, the Brahmins, the priest class, and the Kshatriya, the warrior class underneath them, pretty much ran things. In this time period, the two bottom classes are now beginning to gain their own wealth. And with that wealth comes a little bit of resentment towards the Brahmins, who had had all these special favors earlier before. And you're going to kind of see them turn away from the Brahmins. They're going to start looking at some of those old rituals as being kind of silly and antiquated. So they're moving away from the religion just a little bit there. Religiously speaking of religion, this is a time period when Buddhism will arrive. Buddhism was founded by a Indian prince named Siddhartha Gautama, who has this really cool story of when he was born. The prophecy said that he would have two choices: that he could choose to be a great prince of India, or he could give all that up and become a spiritual man in the world. Well, his father did not want that to happen, so he pretty much locked Siddhartha Gautama under house arrest, and he wouldn't let him go outside and stuff. Gautama was actually married and had a child himself when he just couldn't stand it anymore. He had to get out in the world. And he took 4 journeys. On one of his journeys, he came out into the world and he saw, an old man. One of the journeys, he saw a sick man. One of the journeys, he saw a corpse. And then his 4th journey, he saw a holy man. And the holy man, he talked to him and, was really impressed by what he was hearing. And basically what it showed Siddhartha Gautama is that everyone's going to live, get sick at some point or another, and they're eventually going to die. And that the only way to peace is through wisdom and seeking spirituality. So he gives everything up. He leaves his wife and his child behind. He leaves his kingdom behind. He goes out into the world basically as a poor man, as a beggar, and immediately attracts a large following. Initially, poor people were the ones that were responding to him, much like Christianity. It appealed to poor people, but eventually many people would be attracted to Buddhism's very relaxed nature. They don't believe in the idea of reincarnation and you're rich because you did good things in your previous life, or you're poor because you were a bad person in your previous life. So people really, really were attracted to that idea. Now, Ashoka, going back to Ashoka in the Chandragupta, as far as religion we're talking about, his conversion to Buddhism meant that Buddhism was going to have a place in Indian society. He gave them special grants, special favors, and stuff like that. However, hundreds of years later, when the Gupta took over, they're going to push the Buddhists out a little bit, and they're going to reestablish the authority of Hinduism. And today, Hinduism is by far the dominant religion in India. About 75% of all Indians are part of the Hindu faith. So really, that's your chapter in a nutshell. Keeping with the themes that we've seen up to this point, that these large empires really provided safety and stability and helped facilitate trade. Trade is astronomical in this time period. We're having advances in science and mathematics because people have more safety and they have more wealth, and a lot of things are going on for them. So we'll continue the classical age with